So we're in the book of Revelation, the apocalypse. That comes from the Greek word apocalypsis.
It's time to change your world. It's time to let it go. The things you used to think, the things you used to know, they don't help you anymore. It's time to change your mind. If it's peace you want to find.
This is Kurt Kaikonen, pastor of Calvary Chapel, Waterford, at your neighborhood church. Today on Change Your World, we'll be in the book of Revelation. So grab your Bible. We'll be starting in chapter 3.
It's time to change your world. You need to let it go.
So this week, we're going to continue on our bus tour of the 7 churches that Jesus addresses in the book of Revelation. And so last week, we started heading south from the church up in Thyatira all the way down to Sardis. And so now we're headed south again to check out the last 2 churches and continuing this church hopping tour. And so as we travel 40 miles in a southeasterly direction from Sardis, we end up at this lovely little church in Philadelphia in southeast Pennsylvania, where Joe Foch happens to be the pastor. No, we don't end up there. No, that's the wrong Philadelphia. We're still here in the country of Turkey. And as everyone knows, if you ever went to grade school, that Philadelphia is the city of brotherly love. And that's because Philadelphia means brotherly love, or love of the brethren. And this is the youngest city of all the cities of all the churches to whom Jesus is writing to. And this city was founded by the king of Pergamos. His name was Attalus II, and his nickname was Philadelphias because of his love for his own brother. In this town, it was created to teach the Greek culture throughout all of Asia, and it was called the Gateway to the East. And so Philadelphia, it was a small city, and it was kind of like a missionary city. But it wasn't to spread the gospel, but it was to spread the Hellenistic culture. It was to spread things like their language and to teach the world how to speak Greek and to teach their way of life. Everything you'd need to know to have a successful world empire. And this town, it looked Greek. All the buildings, they were built in the Greek style with all those Greek columns, and it was nicknamed Little Athens. And it was filled with these temples to all the different Olympian gods. But this town, it had a major flaw. And its flaw was that it had all these earthquakes. So this town was always being evacuated. But even with all these problems, it was a very beautiful and very prosperous town. And that's because they lived on the greatest highway in the world, the Silk Road. And this is the road which connected Asia to Europe. And to this church in Philadelphia, Jesus, he doesn't describe himself with any of those descriptions that we found in chapter 1, but he describes himself as holy and true. And holy, what that means he's separate, that he's separated because God, he is separated from all of his creation, where God is holy, that he is separate from us. He is separated from us. And then Jesus says he's true, which is that Greek word atheninos, which means something being true. So he's not saying like true, like someone's telling a lie or someone's going to tell you something false. But what he's saying is that he is real. He is true, that he is the real God. And then he describes himself as he who has the key of David, he who opens and no one shuts, and shuts and no one opens. And when you have keys, that means you have authority. And so Jesus here, what he is saying is that he's the one who has the authority to give access to the Father. He's the one who has those keys to give access to the King. And this is a quotation from Isaiah 22:22. And what that talks about, it talks about the Messiah and about the Messiah being a peg, and that he will have all the glory of his Father's house. And then Jesus goes on, and just like with all the other churches, Jesus tells them that he knows their works. And so he knows all the difficulties that they've faced. And then Jesus tells them that he sets before them an open door that no one can shut. And so what Jesus is talking about is he's talking about that he's giving them an opportunity for them to have evangelism. And because this is a church that has a vision to reach the lost world. And so Jesus, he has set this open door before them. And then Jesus is telling them to see that he has set this open door before them. Because even if you have an open door before you, it won't do you any good if you don't see it. So he tells them to see. And I believe that Jesus does this for a lot of his churches that faithfully follow him, because Philadelphia was a very faithful church, that he sets open doors for us, but that we have to see them, just like this church, where he's showing it to these people. And then these doors are opened, but you still have to walk through these doors, because even with open doors, you have to have faith to walk through them. And with a door, you can't always see what's way past them. But for these people, Jesus is telling them, and he's assuring them, that if they go through this open door, that no one is going to slam this door into their face. But there's a little bit of a warning for us, because just because there is an open door, and just because you can see an open door doesn't always mean it's from Jesus. You have to have discernment. You have to be connected to him to be able to hear from him or to see that open door is from him. Because if he doesn't reveal it to you, then all it is just circumstances. And if it's just circumstances, you can make a lot of mistakes. Because sometimes we can find ourselves trying to create our own open doors where we will convince ourselves that God has opened a door, and then we start to see things fall apart. And you'll hear people swear that they believe that God opened that door, and then he allowed all this trouble. And I'm not the judge of anybody's circumstances or what doors God has opened in their lives. I have a hard time trying to figure out the open doors that he's placed in my own life. But when you see somebody lose a home or lose a job or a relationship, it's really heartbreaking. But then when they come and then they blame God for it, that makes it kind of doubly heartbreaking, because it's possible that wasn't a door that Jesus had opened, and that it wasn't a door that he had shown them, but it was a door that we opened out of our own hearts, because we had our own heart set on something that we wanted to happen. Because when Jesus opens a door, the reason everything always works out, the reason that nobody can shut it, is because he opened it. And so I don't know if you've seen these things, but I've seen these things where something ends up going forward, but it shouldn't have gone forward. The thing was way bigger than yourself. And on your very best day, that you couldn't have opened that door on your own to go through it, except that it was one of the works that God had already prepared for you to go through. And when you see these doors, and even though they're opened, it's still going to take faith on our part to go through them. When I think of this, I think about when we bought this church. This church was an open door, because I think if you wanted to start a church the way that this church was started, you would never be able to do it, because there were just way too many things to be able to put together to make it work for anyone, unless you were very, very wealthy or you're very, very clever and you're manipulative. But this church was led, and in every step of the way, step by step by step, the doors were just being opened right in front of us. And the problem I was having with it was that nobody was shutting the doors. And the whole time, through the whole process, your spirit's being impressed with all these thoughts. And these thoughts are not your own thoughts. And it's speaking to you all these things that you believe that God wants to do. And as you went forward, you kept going, and nobody was stopping it. And the only one who could have stopped it would have been me. Because the truth is Jesus was obviously not stopping it. So even though all the doors were opened, all the doors, they still had to be walked through in faith. And these doors for this church, they were obviously seen. They weren't made up from our own hearts. Everything pretty much was shown to us and spoken to us. And the way we know that they weren't ours is because all the way up to the very closing, I wanted to get out of it. I did not want to take the risk, and I did not want to take the responsibility. But then he would speak to my heart, and he would say things to me like, well, don't you have any faith at all that I can do these little things? Because this church is just a little thing. And if you're a believer in Jesus Christ and you're a Christian, you will have doors open before you, and they will be doors that no one can shut. Ephesians 2:10 says, For we are his workmanship, created in Christ Jesus for good works, which God prepared beforehand that we should walk in them. So he's already prepared the works. He's already opened the doors. So all you have to see is the doors that he's already opened for you, and then you need to walk through them in faith. And then Jesus, he tells this church, he says, you have a little strength, have kept my word and have not denied my name. And the word little here is the word mikros, which is the word micro, which means small, like a microphone or a microwave or micromanagement. But the word strength here is the Greek word dunamis. And that's like a dynamo. That's the word where we get dynamite. So that's a very, very powerful word. And so when Jesus says here, you have a little strength, he's not criticizing them at all. And he's not calling them weak in any way. What he's actually saying is he's saying, you have strength. You have a little strength. Jesus is actually calling them strong. And by Jesus saying that you kept my word and haven't denied my name, that's a big deal. Because even though we don't read about it, this church is probably going through the same persecution as all the other churches in the area. Because if you realize, Smyrna is not very far away. It's located on this same Silk Road. And right here, we do read that they were going through the same type of persecution that Smyrna was going through by the Jews. From those Jews who are not Jews, the ones that Jesus calls the synagogue of Satan. And some people here, they'll say that by Jesus saying that this church has an open door before them, that what he's really letting us know and what he's getting at is that the synagogue in this town in Philadelphia has been shut to the church in Philadelphia. But what it's definitely saying here is that he's not going to let these people who are called Jews do this very long, that they are going to come and they're going to worship before their feet, and they will know that Jesus loved them. And so now Jesus isn't saying that they're going to come and worship them, that they're going to come worship the people of the Church of Philadelphia, but that they're going to worship before them. And so what this sounds like is that these people are going to be worshiping Jesus too. And I don't know if it's before or after the second coming, but what it sounds like these people will get saved and they will be converted and they will worship with them. And so this sounds a lot like the Apostle Paul, where he was a hostile Jew and he persecuted the church, and he actually had belonged at one time to this synagogue of Satan. But then when he got saved, and now we know that he worships in heaven with the same people that he martyred before he knew Christ. And so the Jews here, they know that Jesus loves these Gentile people in this church in Philadelphia. And then Jesus tells this church, I'll keep you from the hour of trial, which will come upon the whole world. And most Bible scholars, they say that this is referring to the Great Tribulation. And then here where it says, to test those who dwell on the earth. And that phrase, who dwell on the earth, well, that phrase is used 9 times in the book of Revelation. And that phrase is always used to speak about the people who are not saved. So that phrase is always used to speak about lost people. And it's like in Revelation 17:8, where it says, and those who dwell on the earth will marvel, whose names are not written in the book of life. So that phrase, it's always talking about the lost. And so what I believe this is saying that this faithful church, that they will not go through the Great Tribulation, and that they will be raptured, and that they're going to be kept from this hour of testing. And not just this one faithful church, but that Jesus is talking about his faithful church as a whole. But there are people that think differently. They're Christians, but they believe that the church will go through the tribulation. And what they will say about this passage is that they'll say, well, Jesus will keep them through it, that he will keep them through the tribulation, not from it. But the problem here is there's this word here that says persevere. And the way that the word persevere is used here, it's used in the past tense, which means that they had already done what has been done to keep them from this hour. Because this is talking about a reward for their past perseverance. And then Jesus, he tells his church that he's coming quickly. And we looked at that word quickly before. And quickly here, it doesn't mean so much that it's going to be happening fast or immediately, but it means that when it happens, it will be suddenly and it will be unexpectedly. So when this happens, it's going to be sudden. And then Jesus says, hold fast, which is kind of like him saying, well, hold on. And when he says, hold fast to what you have, and he's talking about that solid foundation that they already have. And he says to hold on to that, hold fast. And he says, so no one will take your crown. So apparently, someone can take your crown. But the way that this is written, it's not implying that your crown can be stolen, but it's that your crown can be given to another. So this is like you didn't win the race. So you didn't get the winner's crown. It means you came in like second or third place and you didn't finish your race well. And so that laurel leaf crown that you would have received as the winner would be given to another person running that race. That you didn't complete your race, but the only way that you can actually lose this crown, it's by you not holding fast. It's not like we're really competing against each other, but we're just really competing against what we know and what the Lord has told us to do. But now, if you're one who holds fast and you're an overcomer and you did win your crown, he gives these great promises. And he says, you will be made a pillar in the temple of Jesus' Father, who Jesus here, he calls my God. And a pillar means that you will stand strong, that you will have a place there, and you will be a support. You'll be one who upholds the temple. You'll be a permanent resident there. And then it says, you will no longer go out no more. And when I read stuff like that, I always think, yeah, but what if I want to go out, you know? And you mean I can't go out anymore? But there's a sense where when we get to heaven, I will never want to go out again. I will never want to go back into a world of chaos. I would never want to go back to sin and the darkness that kept me away from that presence of God. I never will want to be under the influence of sin ever again and all the effects that sin had had on my life. And so there's a promise here that one day all of that will be taken away. And you have to remember that here in Philadelphia, they often had to go out because they had to evacuate the city because of the frequent earthquakes. But in heaven, they will never have to leave there because of trouble. And then Jesus says, I will write on him the name of my God, the name of the city of my God, the New Jerusalem, which comes down out of heaven from my God. I will write on him my new name. And when I read this, all I ever think is of that movie Toy Story, you know, when Andy writes his name on the bottom of Buzz Lightyear's foot. And then where Woody, he also has Andy's name on the bottom of his foot, which means that they belong to him, that they belong to Andy. So I think in the same way, we will belong to him, that we will belong to Jesus, and that we will belong there. And that's why they write our new address of the New Jerusalem on us, because it's just like my mom did on my first day of first grade. She pinned a little note on my raincoat, said 176 Minot Street, just in case I got lost. So it's saying here that we have a home, we have a place where we belong, and we have the address of our Father written on us. And so now we need to hear here with us that have ears what the Spirit says to the churches. All right. And so Smyrna and Philadelphia, these were the only two churches that Jesus had nothing to say bad about. All they had was words of encouragement. But now we're going to go to Laodicea. And in Laodicea, Jesus has nothing good to say about them. He only has correction for him, just like he did to the church over in Sardis. So now we leave Philadelphia on our Calvary Chapel bus on our tour, and we approach our last stop in Laodicea. And I'm kind of reminded of that movie, A Christmas Carol, which, you know, some people call Scrooge, where he had those two messengers, you know, and that had come to Ebenezer Scrooge, where the first messenger came, and it was kind of like a mixed bag. It was kind of like, you know, the good and the bad. of Christmas is past. And then there was that second messenger that came and of Christmas is present, and everything was really all good. And then comes that last messenger, and Scrooge says, I fear you more than all. And I think that's what Jesus says here, because he has absolutely nothing good to say to this church except for those who overcome. All right, so Laodicea, it is 45 miles south of Philadelphia, and it was named after the wife of one of its rulers. But Lao means people, and Dicea means rights. So Laodicea means the people's rights or the people ruling. And Laodicea was a large, wealthy city with a large Jewish population. And they had emperor worship, and they had a healing center, and they had that temple to the god Asclepius, and they had a famous medical school that was attached to that temple. And Laodicea, it was also affected by earthquakes. They had a really large earthquake in 60 AD where it had destroyed the whole city. But this city was so wealthy, they didn't need any outside help to rebuild the city. In fact, what they did is they refused Rome's help to rebuild their city because they didn't want it, because they had a big pride about being really wealthy. In this city, they exported goods to all over the world. So it's kind of like Amazon's warehouse or Amazon's headquarters. And they produced like 3 different types of these wool garments made from their extremely soft, glossy black wool. And then they exported these capsules that was filled with tetrafurgi, which is this phosphorus compound. And what it did is you mixed it with water, and it made this very popular eye salve. And this eye salve would correct any eye ailment you might have. And everybody wanted it. But later on, this eye salve had been tested, and it was found not to really work. So really, they'd make this stuff, but it was really just like putting mud in your eyes. But they all believed it worked. And so this was a wealthy, prosperous city, and it was located in the Tri-City area because this city was between 2 other cities. It was between the cities of Hierapolis and Colossae. But this city, it had one major flaw, and it was their lousy water supply. And although the city was on the Lycus River, it dried up every year during the summer months. And so they had no stable water to the city. So all their water, it had to be piped in by aqueduct. And so their main source of water came from about 6 miles away from that city of Hierapolis, which had a hot spring. But on its travel, that water didn't stay hot enough to be able to have hot water in the city. And that water, it never got cold. So the best it ever got was to be lukewarm. But now from the city of Colossae, which was a little further away, they had another source of water. And that water was this ice cold, refreshing spring water. But because it came from further away, by the time it reached the city, it was tepid. So that means it was room temperature. So that was also lukewarm. So the best way for me to describe this water in Laodicea, it was be probably like drinking out of a warm garden hose that was sitting out in the sun all day. And it says that people often got sick from drinking this water.
You need to change your world. You need to let it go. Oh, oh, oh.
Thanks for listening to Change Your World. Change Your World is an outreach of Calvary Chapel, Waterford, and your neighborhood church. If you're listening to Change Your World in the Detroit metro area, you can still make it to church today. And join us at 10 a.m. at Calvary Chapel, Waterford, 183 South Winding Drive, Waterford, Michigan. We're competing with the Catholics. It's only an hour. All the donuts you can eat, and you don't have to believe a thing we say, but it could change your world.
You need to change your world.
The rest of today's message can be heard at yourneighborhoodchurch.org. So check us out and download the app. And until next week, remember,